And so I've had a few readings so far. One I was met with, even while engaging the audience, was met with so much silence that it was unnerving. And I was like, oh God, flop sweat, everything. I mean, just like not my finest moment. But then I had another reading, which I read just one poem. And
And wait,
glad of
what is this? The poem "Eat It from Behind"? Can you?
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Testing, testing. Hello, hello, hello. Hey, I'm Tim Barnes. You are the genre. And in every episode of the show, I ask a guest about the first genre that inspired them, the first craft that they pursued, and how they feel about that first craft now. And my guest in this episode is the one and only, well, there's probably quite a few people with this name. Let's be honest. Why do I tend to say the one and only? There are a lot of people with a lot of names out there. But he is the one and only person that I know named Andrew Colarusso, and he owns a bookstore in my neighborhood called Taylor and Co. Books in Ditmas Park, Brooklyn. I actually used to work there. I was the Monday guy at Taylor and Co. Books, and he's a great person, wonderful writer, and he has a new book out called Petty God. It's spelled Pettyg-D, but I'm sure if you type in Petty God the way that you would with the O, it'll also pop up. It's a collection of poetry. And in fact, on the back of the book is a quote, a blurb from Mahogany L. Brown, who is a past guest of the show, writing about him. I'll read a bit of it. Andrew E. Colaruso's newest is a sharp-edged, erotic, politically unflinching poetry collection where syntax is shattered to reveal deeper ancestral reckoning. There's a lot more to this quote, and at one point she references one of the poems in here that, let's just say, is a moment in this intro where I should warn you that I no longer bleep out episodes of this show. This show is an explicit show. I found that finding the curse words and bleeping them out, either manually or through the wonders of, I guess, AI technology, is just too time consuming. And I think that we're adults here, I think. The world is with people who curse. The world is with people who curse. And in honor of something that I have coming out, a scripted podcast called Judge Travis that has curse words and is about leaked behind the scenes audio of a fictional court show, I'm embracing authenticity in this episode. I'm not putting as many edits. I'm not cutting out as many background sounds. This is au naturel, this episode. And we're sort of, Andrew and I, interviewing each other about each other's projects in this episode. I think that we're both the types who don't like to promote in an overtly flashy way, but the beast is the beast. You have to promote the thing you worked on, because if you don't, what was the point? Are you not proud of this thing you made? Of course you are. And of course, you're going to get yourself a copy of Petty God. Of course, I hope you're going to listen to my scripted audio series, Judge Travis. This episode is without a typical commercial break in the middle. There's been a lot of things going on as I lead up to the February 11th release of Judge Travis. In fact, that same night at 7 p.m. at Taylor & Co. Books in Ditmas Park, Brooklyn, we're going to have a little premiere and listening party for Judge Travis. So you should stop by if you heard this in time to join us. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Andrew E. Colarusso. While your parents are watching TV.
Well, yes, and unfortunately they're not here, but they would be here. CNN would be at full volume, and so they'll come in the middle of the interview at the moment when you're about to bare your soul. My mom will be like, "What do you want for dinner?" And it'll pick up all that audio.
Nice. Well, yeah, you're already setting things up for the energy that this is going to be, because I feel like we're kind of co-interviewing each other here. We're both, we don't like the idea of a certain type of self-promotion, I think, but we both reluctantly move forward despite this.
Yeah, and we'll continue to lift each other up, I think.
Yeah, and so you have a collection of poetry. How do I say the name of this? What's the proper? How am I supposed to say the title?
So it's Pedigod.
Pedigod, but you kind of you covered the O isn't always
Hmm.
there in God.
Hmm. So this is an old. So a rabbi told me that this is technically a Christological conceit, but I remember growing up. My best bud, he's half Chinese, half Ashkenaz Jewish, and I remember one time when AIM was a thing, we would always be talking on AIM, AOL Instant Messenger, for those of you who don't know what that is. And he would write out God, but he would like leave out the O,
Uh,
just put a dash there. And I was like, why are you doing that? What are you doing?
yeah,
And he would explain that um, it's often thought of as a Judaic conceit because in Judaism, you're not allowed to pronounce the name of God,
yeah,
which is Yud He Vav He, or Yahweh essentially. So you're not supposed to say that. So there are a number of different names: Adonai, Hashem, which means the name. Alternatives to saying the actual name of God, which is why in some instances you'll find people who don't even write out the word God. They'll put G-D as a sign of reverence. Um, but then one rabbi told me this was like anyway. But yeah, so it's petty God, and that's, you'll see in like the epigraph. There's some Hebrew in there. A lot of it has to do with explorations of Abrahamic faith um, and notions of divinity and supernatural things. I don't
okay, okay. So yeah, I prefer to say the artist formerly known as when I am talking about him. But
know.
I am referenced in this collection of poems, and I think that this is interesting because not only am I does my name appear in this, but the piece you've written in which my name appears is in the blurb. And I think this is an excellent point to remind the listeners of You Are the Genre that I no longer bleep the show. I allow all of the vulgar words to fly now.
Oh dear.
So just me saying this title could cause an uproar. I mean this genuinely.
Tim, are you sure you want
So
to do this?
I am going to say these words
Are you sure you want to
because
do this?
I think it's a unique connection between the work that I've been doing and the work that you've put forth here. The piece is titled "The Pussy Detective,"
Hmm.
and you're not talking about cats.
No,
And
it's a poem about the days before you were married. So I try to capture,
that is
some of.
not that is not the origin of this poem. What happened is, so this podcast is one of the many features of a newsletter that I have called Letters from African America, in which I primarily, email topical jokes each day. And it started off with just very experimental, as most newsletters do. And one of the things that I was doing was I was doing text interviews in which people could choose any form of text communication. And for 3 days, as long as they answered at least one of my questions, I would, through great detail, explain how we communicated. So if someone pressed the haha button here or whatever, or someone did a direct reply versus something else. I thought that was interesting. And the last version of that I did was with a writer named Duvet Knox, who has a novel titled The Pussy Detective. It was a
Mhm.
very confusing conversation, but I'm grateful in many ways for having had it. And you own a bookstore. I should mention that as well. You own a bookstore, and having read that, you decided to have some copies of Duvet Knox's novel, The Pussy Detective, which is kind of a black exploitation esque. Um, I don't know how you could best describe it, but it sold out quickly. It sold
Yeah.
out quite quickly. So now there's a piece in Petty God by Andrew Colarusso titled "The Pussy Detective," and it's basically dedicated to me.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and now that we know it's not really about the player that you that you used to be before you were married. Um, it is written in the style of Duve Knox, who in the interview, and I would highly recommend if you've not read Tim's interviews, they're really wonderful. This one was unique among the interviews because he wrote entirely in a sort of blaxploitation vernacular, and so his all his replies were in this like very using like abbreviated words like slang spelling, um, and even the word vernacular I think is fascinating because the first part verna I think implies a slave born in the master's house. So I think
Mm,
vernacular is very it's a loaded word, but I mean he's writing in a sort of vernacular. He's responding to you in a
mm.
vernacular, and you're as an interview trying to like how do I reply to this, and is how much of this is performance, how much of it is authentic. It's very curious, but the poem itself is about, if I had to put it into words, reparations. um it's about a detective who's, I mean, the novel is kind of blaxploitation. He is a pimp, and Duvet in the interview has very interesting thoughts on what constitutes a pimp. I would call it ethical pimp nogamy. He has
Mm.
it's a theory that clearly is like what we think about as pimping in contemporary language is actually trafficking, sex trafficking. But the way I understand pimping, and then he goes to explain, I think in the interview, that like pimping is really about love. um, so the poem itself is like it's written and voiced in that style that he was writing with, and like I tried to pick up on his vernacular and like his idiosyncrasies. But the poem itself doesn't have to do with sex or trafficking or even really pimping so much as it's kind of like a PI who's
Yeah.
on the case for reparations. Wait, so Tim, forgive me, I have to. I think the you are the genre has already started. We've already started. We're in it.
We've already started, yes. And I'm trying to embrace authenticity in the podcast form. So if anyone hears a bunch of rustling here, I'm trying to turn off the heater that just kicked on so that I can have good sound here. But continue, I can hear you.
Okay, so I was hoping we could start with you. I mean, we've already gotten to the thick of it. We've gotten directly to the pussy detective. We've gotten to the heart of the issue, really. So where do we go from here? Well, we have to go to the showstopper, um, Mr. Tim Barnes. I thought this was going to be an interview with Tim Walsh, and I had a lot of questions about what is going on. But Tim Barnes is fine. I can interview Tim Barnes and ask him some questions. It's the real question is, are you prepared
I think
for?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay,
What
okay.
do you, what's up your sleeve?
Well, I mean, you know, what's the first genre that called out to you as a kid?
Well, I've answered this question in some of these episodes where, for me, it really was science fiction that called out to me when I was a kid. I wanted to invent flubber ever since the Robin Williams movie came out. I read the novelization of Flubber. Uh, got that when I my Scholastic pamphlet, and
That's
unfortunately, it was very
one
bad
of the
at
great books.
yeah, yeah, the novelization of the Robin Williams remake of the original Flubber is one of the greatest texts ever made.
Incredibly effective.
Unfortunately, very bad at math, so science wasn't for me, and that got me into it got me into the idea of wanting to be a filmmaker and all these other kinds of things spiral out from my my love of science fiction.
But then as a genre, science fiction, and I know it from your other work and your particular taste, your investments in sci-fi and film, um, television, comics. How does that then translate to this incredible audio sitcom, audio comedy, um, Judge Travis, which is a remarkable achievement. It is hilarious. I've had the pleasure of listening in advance, and it had me laughing at moments I never would have expected. So, how does your love of sci-fi translate then to this incredible audio comedy that you've written? most of, not all
Hmm.
of it, right? That you had some collaborators, which is another question I would love to ask. But how do we get from sci-fi to Judge Travis?
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, the sci-fi leads to my interest in like how do people make the things that like I loved the movie Flubber, so it's like, oh, how to maybe that's the thing. So I dedicate a lot of time just like the idea of being a filmmaker, and then somehow fell equally in love with the concept of being a stand-up comic. So I started doing that for a long time, and then on top of that, for some reason, I had the goal when I moved to Chicago and really started to focus on comedy of knowing it was Chicago, of being a one of those producers on This American Life.
Mm.
And so that general pursuit and my ability to edit, I was always on one hand in front of the camera or on stage, but also behind it and knowing how to do all that kind of stuff. Um, and a project like Judge Travis, I think, really is like it's the is accumulation a word? It's the combo
The apotheosis.
apotheosis. It's the combo platter of all the things that I've learned from all of the weird work that I've done in media.
Mm.
And it's also surprisingly personal to me. But I think the real thing is that this project is something that I think has helped me rediscover my own my own comedic voice after doing so many things where the job is to like master someone else's comedic voice as like a writer for certain shows and things like that. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I do want to get back to the Pussy Detective because that's the origin of how you went about writing that. But then I look at the back of the book, and Mahogany Brown, the famous poet Mahogany Brown, has a long, beautiful blurb in which one of the things, the first thing I believe she highlights is your piece, The Pussy Detective. So I think that's crazy. That journey from from one of the strangest interviews I've ever had to it being featured in this collection of poetry is fascinating. But I should also ask you, uh, what was the first genre that called out to you when you were a kid?
Oh man. After pimping, um, I was very, very early on just infatuated with the idea of pimping, but I realized it was very impractical. Um, Around the age of 3, I realized that I can't pursue pimping, but I think I'm interested in poetry. And so
Another P
that
word.
became, yeah, the P words, man. I mean, so many good ones. So many good ones. But poetry for sure called out to me at a relatively early age. Um, I think partly it's two things in contemplating um, genre and contemplating origins and the variety of interviews that you've already done. Um, I, in my own origin story, remember distinctly two things that had an effect on me. One was that as a kid, I couldn't parse the semantic difference between the verb write, to write, and the verb to draw.
Mm.
I was like, what really is the difference there? Am I in writing with a pencil? Do kids still use pencils and paper? Is that a thing they use still?
I
In
hope
any
so.
case,
Yeah.
I think we grew up with pencils and paper. And I always thought, well, what I'm doing is drawing. I mean, I'm drawing words, I suppose. But this semantic distinction between writing and drawing was very interesting to me. Um, and the other thing was my dad had a printer. He had like a DOS computer, kind of like
Mhm.
the matrix screen, the black with the green. I honestly I don't even know how it worked or how he even, but it was connected to a printer which he had also. And this had to be like 91, 92. And I realized like if I type out words, he could print them on paper. And that to me was so intoxicating. I've really never gotten over the power and pleasure that gave me. Uh, Even to this day, when I print out a poem, it feels I still get a very similar kind of head rush of like, wow, look at that. That's I wrote that. It is printed. Now it is an object in my hand. And
Were you writing poetry as a kid? Is that what you're saying?
not I mean, not quite. I at that point, that stage in my life, it was just words. And so recognizing, oh, I can type out words and then print them up. There weren't fully formed poems. I think it would be a few more years until like grade school when my mom helped me with a poem that was supposed to be about the five senses. And and with my one of my first collaborators, who's my mother, Nancy Sanchez Taylor, we were able to write a really beautiful poem about walking on the beach, and the teacher loved it, and I realized like, oh, okay. I mean, there's a little bit more to this process. It's not just words; it's stringing the words together to create an image, to create an idea, um, and so it evolved over time.
Hmm.
I hung up my pimp cane, and I felt more comfortable with poetry. It's only ever so slightly less risky
Hmm.
to pursue poetry, and way less lucrative, honestly.
Who were the poets that were inspiring you at that age?
When I mean, as a little kid, there weren't really any. I wasn't really reading poetry. I mean, the Langston Hughes for sure, and I
Hmm.
think this is the beauty of Langston Hughes. As I got older, I was like, there. I find his poetry simple, but that was very deliberate on his part as a poet. Like he wanted to write poetry that could be beloved by anybody at any age, and clearly that worked. I mean, I could, as a kid, appreciate Langston Hughes, and then as I got a little older, um, there were poets that were given to me that um, but I don't think it was until college really that I started to get well, later high school and college that I started to get more of an interest in more sophisticated, let's say, not more sophisticated than Langston Hughes, but like more, let's say, refined sense of my own aesthetics, which involves negation, right? It's like, well, this is I don't like this, I don't want to do this, but I do like this, and I want to do more of this and create my own thing. And
Hmm.
but I will say that we can, I think, have these revelations at an age before we can be cognizant of, oh, I know what this involves. I know, like, you can know, oh, I want to do something because you see it, you feel it,
Hmm.
whatever. And there's this old Latin phrase, like poeta nasciter non fit. The poet is born, not made.
Hmm.
And I think this is true of every creative, right? That like you get the taste for the creative spark before you really know what work is involved in that, before you know what the reality of it would be, or what your aesthetic will be, or what your style will be, um, which I think is probably true for you as well, right? As someone who I I don't want to say you're a comedian.
Hmm.
Comedy is something that you do. Comedy is woven into the fabric of your creativity, which involves writing, performance, community building. But there's something about comedy, I would say, that is really inflected in a lot of what you do, it seems now, and you're very good at it. So when you were cutting your teeth on certain comedy scenes and circuits, um, what was that like for you in the beginning? And now how are you feeling about it at this stage in your life? Because I know we've talked about it, and you've
Hmm.
I think comedy, like everything else, is also undergoing its own like evolutionary moment, its own transformational moment where you can't just be a stand-up comic anymore, right?
Yeah, you have to be. You're basically a content creator. Um, yeah, I don't know. Comedy to me doesn't isn't wacky to me anymore. I think maybe it used to be, but comedy doesn't feel too different from the word drama in my head anymore. I don't know what that is, but comedy is one of the most serious words that I can think of because I think comedy is irony. Uh, so that's something I'm trying to work my way through now, where it's like comedy is just like comedy can just comedy can be the most fucked up thing you've ever said to someone. You know, like comedy can be like like comedy can hurt, you know? So
Mhm, mhm,
uh but yeah, when I first started doing comedy, I don't know what the reasoning behind the impulse was, but I have realized that, like, the ultimate reason that I did it, if I wanna get to the core, is that through telling a joke on a stage in front of people and getting the laugh, that is how I know 100% that I have been understood, and that's really what the joy of it comes from. Oh, as someone who can be a very rambling person, who can be a very vague person, I know that's one of the few things where it's like, I'm completely understood because of this specific reaction. So that's why I do it. I'm less interested in it now because so much of it is, mm, online, and if there is indeed a community building element, of of who I am, maybe that's a part of what I'm feeling as well, that that's, like, not really possible to do in a genuine way anymore, so, uh, yeah, that's the answer to that.
hmm,
But something I've been realizing is how much poetry and prose is about performance. I've been looking at like a lot of Toni Morrison Q&As and interviews. And whenever she reads a passage from one of her books, like, oh, all of a sudden it's not that it's not as authentic as her just talking, but she really dives into just like the mode and the genuine voice of the chapter that she's reading. And a lot of poets do the same thing, and I think that's probably why I wouldn't be a good poet because I would want to say at the same in the same monotone way that I'm answering your question right now.
mm,
And I don't know what the difference is between the style of performing a poem or telling a story on stage versus stand up, but I think that it's that same thing where you're not getting that specific laugh reaction. You can get it, but the few
mhm,
times that I've done storytelling or tried to do anything more serious than comedy, those silences are really threatening. How
mhm.
do you deal with that?
Oh, man. That's an awesome question, and it makes me think a number of things, which is not least of which I think you're not giving yourself enough credit as a performer, but we'll come back to that. Um, your question makes me think of another question, um, which I will answer your question before passing on the other question, but, um but how does one navigate the silence? And I think that is something that you now are going to be thinking about with the release of Judge Travis, where you're not necessarily um, in front of an audience. You can't, with the audio drama, the audio comedy, it's being dispersed into people's homes, into their cars, into their so you can't really gauge when you're getting the laugh, right? Which is, like you said, the immediate feedback of success. Ah, okay, here's my dopaminic response. I know I've hit my mark. Now, as a poet, it's very similar. It's not I when I read, I like to get people to laugh and I like to get people to interact. And I feel like similarly, when I'm reading, if I get the audience to laugh or if I get them uh, to engage with me in a very traditional call and response way, I've succeeded. Because one thing that I've um, grown to understand or feel is that for much of my writing career thus far, it's been very experimental texts, and it's like playing free jazz. There's a very niche audience for it, but I did find that playing all this free jazz, metaphorically in poetry and in writing, when I finally turned back to look at the audience, nobody was there.
Mm,
And so with this book, with Petty God, I feel like this is my first pop album.
mm,
This is my concession to a relationship to the audience where
mm,
I'm not playing with my back to them. I'm playing in service to them, in service for them. There to entertain, there to engage, there to be present. And so I've had a few readings so far. One I was met with, even while engaging the audience, was met with so much silence that it was unnerving. And I was like, oh God, flop sweat, everything. I mean, just like not my finest moment. But then I had another reading, which I read just one poem. And
And wait,
glad of
what is this? The poem "Eat It from Behind"? Can you?
I didn't. What I did read it. So that the one where I was met with like absolute silence was I did read "Eat It from Behind" in that reading, and so here's I think slightly where poetry and
I'd also
comedy.
like to make it aware that I can tell that your parents have arrived into your
Can you
home.
hear that? Can you hear
So
the hubbub?
I just love the idea that we're having this specific conversation
Yeah.
within earshot of your parents.
Hey, mom. Love you. I'm chatting with Tim. We're chatting about Petty God and his new audio drama, Judge Travis. But yeah, but let me not be rude. I'll get back to her. She says congratulations.
Thank you.
So part of being a poet means living with your parents in your 30s. But yeah, so this is where poetry and comedy are a little bit different because you can't you can't really as a poet gauge if someone's having a meaningful experience while listening to your poetry. I mean, if you see somebody crying in the front row, I mean that's pretty good indication that something is happening.
Yeah.
But typically if someone's having a meaningful experience, and I as an introvert, a lot of what I'm thinking and feeling is not telegraphed, right? I'm not like it's all happening inside, and so it's sometimes hard to gauge like when your poetry is hitting. This is why poetry is kind of confounding because the metrics for engaging the success or the failure are really difficult to track or maybe even impossible. Now, obviously, there are poets who are incredibly successful, um, whose work is like widely appreciated and beloved, but they occupy quite a minority uh, within the vast scope of poets. And so, as a poet, you kind of have to accept the silence of it, and your motive for doing it can't necessarily or shouldn't necessarily be public affirmation, but a commitment to um, your own desire to express what you know and feel inside. And that takes a little bit of ego, a little bit of delusion also, because why should anybody care what you're feeling when we're all feeling things all the time?
Mm.
Um, but I think this is part of the concession of Pedagogue, which is right. Why should anybody care what I'm writing? Maybe I should write things for people that they can feel, that they can appreciate, that they can see themselves reflected in. And so poems in there like Eat It From Behind came from very confessional moments where I remember that I wrote that poem before a shift at work where I had the revelation and I was like, I that really kind of turns me on. And I've been really embarrassed. I've never admitted that. Been really embarrassed about that for a long time. But I was like, you know what? Maybe I should write something about this. And that the poem came out like I was, before I'd opened the shop, I like banged it out, no pun intended. Um, when it was done, I was like, oh, this is actually like a really decent erotic poem. Unlike the P Detective, Eat It From Behind um, it describes, in a sense, what the title implies. It's very straightforward.
Spaghetti.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. That's
Uh,
how you. I do love spaghetti. We're having spaghetti tonight, actually. That's so funny.
Well, I feel like we need to dive into the second question of the show, which is what was the first the first official craft that you pursued? So you had this early interest in poetry. Did that have some influence into what you would say was the first craft that you pursued, or was it direct line?
Yeah, I think so. It's a craft that I've pursued and never stopped pursuing. And obviously to varying degrees of success. I mean, have I won any significant prizes for my writing. No, but I've won prizes. I've won recognition. It's the kind of thing um, that has been an undercurrent in my life, taking me through various places and experiences, and it's never not been there. Even in instances where I've given up on it, even in instances where, as I remember one pastor, I think she was from Detroit, she called it dying to one's desire. So, in essence, she was saying you have to kind of let go of a thing sometimes because you can be holding on to it too tightly. And this can become a form of idolatry. This can become a form of, sin, even. And so she said, sometimes you have to let a thing go. And I remember thinking that. I remember I was living in Texas at the time, my girlfriend at the time, and I was like, I really can't keep doing this thing. It seems very selfish. I'm not making any money from it. I can't afford to take care of myself or other people by writing all of my stupid free jazz stories and poems. Um, and so that night, I like gave up on it. I was like, I'm done with this. I need to find just a good middle class job. And so my girlfriend and I, that night, we watched this movie called The Book of Life, which came out before Coco, but is very similar to like Coco. It's kind of like Day of the Dead themed. And and that night, before going to sleep, and after having watched the film, I checked my emails, and in fact, in my inbox was an email from a publisher that was like, "We want to publish your first novel." And I was like, oh, "I'm back in the game, baby." um, and so it's one of those things where even when you want to let go of a thing, as I'm sure you've felt multiple times with comedy and especially the performance of comedy, stand up, being in writers' rooms. I know you've shared some stories of genuine uh, frustration, like being in writers' rooms. Even in those instances where you're like, I really cannot keep doing this, and you let go of it, has the craft let go of you, right?
Hmm.
And so that was one instance for me where it's like, after having watched The Book of Life, after having given up on the hubris of being a writer, I get this email that's like, we want to publish your first novel. Um, it's funny. I mean, it's like, and so yeah, the writing, not entirely poetry. I mean, I've written novels. I love short fiction. I love all forms of creativity, and even going back again to this inability to distinguish between what it means to write and what it means to draw. It's also a bit of a visual arts practice for me. I've always enjoyed that. Like I'm more often than not in conversation with visual artists um, in my writing, more even than I am with other poets. Um, so so yeah, it that is the craft that I think has stuck with me, and like I said, it's taken me to different avenues. Now I own this bookstore, I run this bookstore. All the while, still writing poems before a shift, after a shift, sometimes in the middle of a shift.
Having worked at the bookstore, there is a unique vibe to being the person in one of the rare spaces where you don't necessarily have to purchase something to be there. Your mind is allowed to wander. You can see people open up. It's a magical place, a local independent bookstore. But there's also a bit of a burden to it, I feel like. How do you feel about being the person, that presence in a space like that?
Well, it's a responsibility, like anything. I think with any sort of communal endeavor, the thing about community that is a burden, in essence, is accountability. And this is why, as an introvert, I'm perfectly content to be a homebody, because in that way you don't have to answer to anybody other than yourself. Is also partly what I enjoy about poetry as a craft. You're kind of behind the driver's seat of your own solitary spaceship, and you're making the decisions. You're the pilot. Um, but insofar as the bookstore is a community space, a space that is open to anyone, um, I am then accountable to and for the people that come in, the people that are looking for a book or not looking for a book, looking for advice, just want to talk, are killing time. I'm responsible to the financial burden, right? So I have to be accountable for maintaining the fiscal health of the space so that it doesn't collapse. Um, and I don't know if I'm ever doing any of those things in an optimal sense.
Mm.
But I think also part of the beauty of that is disabusing oneself of the notion of an optimal or efficient way to do something and rather allowing allowing it to be a bit of a dirty space, a space where people can feel comfortable, can say the horribly comedic thing. And you've met a few of the characters that have come in. Shout out to and the absurd, this man with his hernia who's constantly going into his pants to adjust his hernia, and then he says the most
Maybe not.
ridiculous Brooklyn, New York thing.
I'll go ahead and bleep his name out. I don't want to put, but that's okay.
Okay.
That does tie into something that I think is interesting about this book. I think anyone who knows you specifically will just like it's very, it has a number of neighborhood inside jokes. I would say it's
Uh,
very inside baseball. I feel like for people in the arts community, specifically in the Ditmas Park area of Brooklyn, even down to like the dedication. I don't want to get too far into this, but I found that fascinating that this dedication I happen to know. I don't know if I should even be mentioning this at all. Maybe this should be cut out. That part of this question should be cut out. But is there a vetting process that you go through? Like, do you reach out to people to say, "Hey, this is going to be highlighted in this bound piece of paper, set of pages"?
yeah, yes and no. So on a legal from a legal standpoint, you don't necessarily need permission to write about anybody. So like you can write, let's say, a biography about Chapel Roan right now, and that's perfectly legal. It would just be considered the unauthorized biography,
Mm,
right? You didn't necessarily get permission, but you don't need permission.
mm,
Um, but all of the poems in here were, and this is something that has always been true of me in my process, that like I think of poetry as a form of correspondence. Um, for a poet who's kind of like paragon of hermetic poetry, right? Emily Dickinson, a sort of like American, what's the Japanese word? Hikikomori. The people that like don't ever leave their apartment.
oh yeah.
Um, for her poetry was a window out into the world. And so when I write poems, and especially if the poem is dedicated to someone or invoking an interaction I've had with someone, um, it's a form of, usually a form of gift giving. In very rare instances, and there are a few in this book, it can be my own kind of pettiness.
Mm,
Like I'm writing a poem about someone and not in like necessarily the most flattering terms. But typically poems that are dedicated for somebody are like meant to be um, a beautiful remembrance of that person or an interaction or a poignant, if
mm,
not beautiful, memory of a person. So I have poems in there about people that kind of populate my small world, but then poems also that make reference to like Percival Everett, that are
mm,
like dedicated to Percival Everett, um, in pettiness, or I can't, or Duve Knox, who I've never met.
mm. Yeah,
And
I've never
yeah, I'm
never met.
still
Yeah,
so curious
yeah.
about this person, and I would love to
So am
meet
I.
Duve
I
Knox.
mean, Duve Knox is a fan of my work, but that particular text interview, it broke me a little bit, and I haven't done a text interview since because it totally deconstructed my concept of of how that series would go. I'll probably bring it back at some point, but it is like a very labor laborious process, actually editing and formatting that interview style. Um, but I do hope that he enjoys Judge Travis, and I do think that I learned a lot about marketing from him, because I did see people just kind of stop in their tracks when they saw the title, when they saw the cover, the fact that
Mm.
the cover has a rated R, little rectangle on it. I saw a woman, probably like a 50-ish-year-old white woman, really just kind of like come in specific. She must have already known it was there, and then she kind of came in, and you could see this sort of delight as she this sort of like delight that's similar to when people had to pick up a Playboy or a Hustler at the 7-Eleven. It was that kind of vibe, and I thought Duvet Knox knows more about pimping is a form of advertising, I suppose. Yeah, I'm just saying that I'm still in awe of the vortex that all of that was.
I still think
Um,
I think it's Percival Everett. I think Duvet Knox is Percival Everett.
okay, but are you prepared for feedback you'll get once some of the people mentioned in this book catch wind of it, of what's written in it?
No, no, I never really. I mean, like I said, most of the poems that are in there have been shared with the people that they've been written for, or
Mm,
and so they've already been privy to like early drafts of it. Except
mm,
Percival Everett, he still hasn't read the poem that I wrote for him. And I had a wonderful opportunity to kind of share it with Dan Senna, who's also quoted, his incredibly talented wife, who's also quoted or epigraphed in the book. Um, but but yeah, most of the people I think have been able to like read it and see it. That said, one is never really prepared for feedback, right?
mm,
Especially as a poet, especially in the kind of solipsistic, hermetic way that we compose with a bunch of voices in our head, like good schizophrenics. And then we put it out and we're like, we did it. Like it's incredibly onanistic and strange poet life. Um, Nowhere near as glamorous as I imagined it would be as a child. But yeah, you're never really. I think it's true of any artist, really. Like, if let's say you're a musician
mm.
and you put out a single and it blows up, um, and you are coming out of like nowhere, just trying to make it big, are you prepared for that level of success? Right? It will come as a shock. I think my experience thus far, and it's partly why I've written Petty God, partly, um, is that nothing stings more than indifference to something you've created, especially if you have the intention of sharing it. And so, love it or hate it, right? There's a reaction there, and there's evidence of human engagement. Versus what has been the tenor of my career so far is largely indifference to what I've written because people don't feel themselves in it. They don't see themselves reflected in the stories and poems that I've written thus far. And so, um, am I prepared? Not really. But I don't know if I ever will be prepared for like somebody being like, "Oh, I read your poem and I felt, or I hated it, or I loved it, or
Well,
but
I will
the
say that in a very different sense, I worry about elements of that with a project like Judge Travis. I don't have specific names of, and a lot of people are amalgamations of different types that I've met. Like the Percy himself is partly my grandfather, partly thoughts that I have about people like Steve Harvey,
mm,
partly famous judges like Judge Mathis or
Mathis, yeah.
Judge Joe Brown, those types, and partly um, things that I've he Judge Travis is also an element of myself, but it also an element of everyone that I've seen in a leadership position a form of entertainment where the buck stops at them and what that does to people.
Mm.
And yeah, yeah, in a weird way, this is what I think you're saying about this collection, Petty God, is the most personal thing that I've ever made. But to me, comedy is about the art of masking up that personal element as as much as possible,
Mhm.
trying to create characters who are whole in their own way. And but do you feel like this has opened up a new style for you or a new path for you in some way?
Well, I think the beauty of this, and again, it's thinking about like aesthetics, is I claim it is mine. It is my aesthetic. It's not that I feel like I'm stepping into a different sort of engagement or accountability, let's say, to my reader. But that wasn't the intention entirely. Partly is that this is just an evolution of my aesthetic. And so the forms that I was working with served me well to, express what I felt I needed to express. And now I've kind of landed on something a little less visually engaged and more about sharing, communicating, interpersonal confession, um, and myth making. Even like, what is my own myth? Um, so it is aesthetically my baby. It's just written maybe with a different intention, maybe with a different a set of expectations and hope. Um, Now, you as a writer, you've written a number of very personal things, but Judge Travis, I feel like, as you mentioned, it does make there's like very clever satire of many of the kind of like interesting celebrity um, personalities that are contemporary, right? So one that was very delightful and funny was and these are all like through the lens of cases, right, that are
Mhm.
like kind of celebrity-ish cases that are brought to Judge Travis and for his show and for ratings. But one of them is very similar, one of the characters very similar to a young actor right now who is currently being nominated for an Oscar and who wants to be the greatest actor of all time, like
Yeah,
as
yeah,
he's quoted LeBron James and other great actors. He wants to be the Michael Jordan of acting. So there's like a thinly veiled stand-in for that talented young gentleman.
yeah,
Um, and there were other characters like that. It was kind of fun when you listen to like a rap album, you like pick out the samples and you're like, oh, I know that song or I know that. Like all of the references in Judge Travis are really fun to dissect because they feel ultimately like a love letter to culture and very specifically to Black culture. But even deeper than that, I was picking up on threads of Black masculinity and Black fatherhood,
mm,
what our relationship is, because so much of it has to do with uh, generational interactions, right? Judge Joe Brown, Judge Travis being a sort of, paragon of like a boomer generation, right?
yeah,
Of a sort of like a blackness that we grew up with um, from our dads, and um, and then um, and then having to like, how do you relate to somebody like that who's like incredibly egoic, but also in his own way trying to just be the best person that he can be.
yeah.
Uh,
I just want to touch on what the specificity of the Steve Harvey thing is unique to me because Steve Harvey is a very funny person. I grew up listening. My mom would always play his radio show driving me to school in the morning, and I would laugh a lot. But then there would always be this point where he's like giving advice to young Black men, and I was like, "Wait, you're not talking about me all of a sudden." So suddenly, there's this monolithic young Black male troublemaker, and that always kind of threw me off. And then certain other things about the type of advice books and things like that always were they were always kind of off to me. But there was something he kind of represents that friction to me. But beyond that, he used to have a talk show in Chicago. There was a segment called Ask Steve, and I got to appear on this segment called Ask Steve, and I asked him a question about just a couple days before I was on there. I got heckled for the first time, so I asked him a question about getting heckled. I don't think the original clip is out there, but my friends at this comedy collective called Grimy Ghost made it like 2 or 3 really funny, weird edits of it. Because on one level, Steve Harvey is an absurd, at this point, he's been in the industry for so long where he just is naturally. Certain celebrities, you become a caricature of yourself. That's how famous you are. Like, you're not Jay Leno, the human being. You're Jay Leno, this concept. You're not Steve Harvey, the human being. You're Steve Harvey, this concept. But I thought that I was communicating with someone who was like a semi joke, but then the actual response he gave to me on his talk show felt so genuine. It felt like he was really excited. I think because he had officially retired from stand up at that point or whatever. And I thought that that was so strange that all of a sudden it's like we really locked in, and it was like a really, um, it felt magical somehow. And then but then he kind of started riffing on these like jokes, like things you can say to the heckler and things like that. But I could tell that I was getting to the heart of the man on some level that not every interaction with him. I assume every interaction with him you don't get to that. And that is a weird little nugget that has stuck with me, and that that can be traced all the way into this. So Judge Travis is in some ways a joke of a human of him. He's a caricature, but the fun of it is like finding these little nuggets of moments where you really do care for this guy who was a child actor since the since the late 70s, and it's just like you can imagine the slew of like insane things he's experienced in his life while trying to be a respectable black man in America. So it's all those it's just a series of contradictions that hopefully one day become a TV show. I think it can be a never ending set of contradictions, but the fun is in like it's just always poking in on all these different issues.
Oh my God. So two questions. The first one is, what was your full question to Steve Harvey, and what was his response? Because you can't just leave us hanging.
No,
Um,
it was just like I got heckled for the first time. Do you have any advice for how to deal with that, or should I just give up? I think that was the question that I asked. And before he started riffing on like the types of jokes you can say to the heckler or whatever. But before that, I forget the exact nature of it, but it was like a vibe shift. It was serious, and sometimes he would answer. He's the whole concept of Steve Harvey in that show and who Steve Harvey is now is that he's going to give raw advice on whatever, and you can imagine all the scale of good and bad of that advice. But I did feel like talking about stand up specifically was I didn't expect to enter this frequency. I expected to just get the jokes on things you can say to the heckler, but yeah, it was strange. It was strange, and my family, it's in general loves Steve Harvey. However, Steve Harvey, I think, is problematic in a number of ways. At the same time, he can genuinely make me laugh quite a bit. So those kinds of contradictions, I think, are what life is, and I don't want to write a character who is just a joke. And I feel like that is kind of what I feel about comedy right now, where it's like it can't just be wacky,
mhm.
like the wackiness is good, but you need to. It's only truly funny because it feels authentic, and to be authentic, you have to have all the levels there.
Oh my God, that's such a profound and beautiful way to put it. And I'm now sort of realizing that we're at very similar stages in our career where it's the stakes feel a little bit weightier, not, you know, uh, least of which in terms of reasons being that we're living in a fascistic moment, right? That like what we should be doing as artists is making something that does please and entertain, but also contains something of a genuinely human and empathetic um, awareness, right? I mean, It is. I mean, it's certainly Judge Travis succeeds in delighting. A couple of my favorites were, without giving away anything, just little riffs. The Jerry Curl Purge of '92, the Great Jerry Curl Purge of '92, that was hilarious to me. Um, I I'm te- another one, and I won't say anymore. There's so many funny moments. Halloween is Satan's Kwanzaa.
Yeah, I think
Thank you.
Millie
Thank you for that.
Tamaras, I think wrote that one.
Okay.
But yeah, it was interesting. It's so satisfying when you have a character that you can just kind of like feed the beast at some point. Um, but what's also surreal about this particular experience, and I guess it is normal for like the season one of most things, but we didn't know who was going to play these characters when we wrote these 8 episodes. So to finally get to the end, and I do feel like we found the perfect voices for all of them. Um, it is like it's so you kind of feel like Dr. Frankenstein or something, where it's like, oh, somehow these went from vague concepts to really fleshed out personalities. Where by the end of these eight episodes, you kind of know how these characters will react to any situation, and then it's about how do they work through how they react to that thing together. that
Mhm.
having characters that three-dimensional is really exciting.
It felt real. Like and it never felt like Judge Travis was just a joke. He felt like I had a fundamental respect for him as an OG, right?
Mm.
As an elder statesman who is also like embodies some of the hubris of our fathers, right? That like but the part of I think the beautiful story, as you just mentioned, is the casting journey that you went on, because you were the head of this, right? You're the visionary, the creative, the showrunner. You're officially a showrunner, and you've done animations, beautiful animations like Maurice on Mars. Like this is like your first full show. So what was the casting journey like?
Really complex. Just because there's four main characters that pop out in all the episodes, basically. So for all of those, I wrote a letter. We sent them one by one, but I wrote a letter to each person that we reached out to, and then it's sort of the waiting game. And I had never been on that particular side of things, and you get kind of hurt when you get the no, because you don't know if it's a no because they didn't like the material, or are they really busy? Did their reps not really, really like all these kinds of questions. But beyond that part of it, it's like while you're waiting, you're fantasizing about this person having the role. And so the real hurt is that you just like, oh, that fantasy is not real. You have to move on to the next possibility. But the best casting, having gone through all of that, was I realized that George Wallace and I already followed each other on Twitter, and so I just DM'd him, telling him like how much I'm a fan of his career. I have this project about a judge. I know how much the old party record, "Here Comes the Judge" by Pigmeat Markham was important to you when you were a kid. All this stuff, and like I'd love for you to play this particular role. The next day, he got back to me and just said yes. Contact my manager. I'm in, and that was very special on a number of levels. But I think like George Wallace isn't playing the judge, but of all the people cast, of all the styles of talking, he's the most similar to my grandfather, who a great deal of this dynamic between the judge character and the producer character is inspired by. So to hear his voice and to hear the way he says certain things, it brings a smile to my face.
Hmm. Yeah, Greg.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he has just one of those most iconic voices. It is a thing in and of itself, and so when you hear Greg, you hear George Wallace speaking for the first time in the audio, it's like it is a moment of kind of pleasurable recognition where you're like, "Oh my god, yes, like, this is a voice that is George Wallace," but it is, like you said, also my grandfather or, like, an OG in my community that,
Yeah.
um so
And his
that.
character represents something. His character, by the way, was never supposed to reemerge after that first episode. Something happens in the first episode, and this is before we knew who was going to play the role. But the writers that I brought on board loved writing this character so much that they were like, "We have to bring him back." And I'm so glad that we did, because I had no idea we'd end up getting someone like George Wallace. But the character himself, and this is gonna be the last thing we say about this, and I'll ask you something, we can wrap up the whole thing. But he represents something even bigger about the show, because he is the closest thing to a father figure that Percy has. And I know it might sound saying that it's crazy that I'm talking about a comedy and we're talking about such such like deep sounding things, but he, as much as Percy represents the general father figure for people our age, Greg represents something even bigger than that. He's allegedly the first black barber in Hollywood. So
Mhm.
you can imagine the things that he's that he's experienced, and so the moments that he gets to interact with Percy, and then he gets to interact with Percy and Jax, they're I think there's something, I don't know what the word is, but there's something. This is the first thing that I've made where I feel like I'm reaching into just like general archetypes and filtering them through like specific characters, and it's just fun. That's really what it comes to. This is the kind of thing that I want to keep doing.
Mm. I also wanted to say before, just one little, that like you never, I don't think you give yourself enough credit for in a number of things. Again, as a performer, as a writer, like you're very, for all who know you, we know you're incredibly humble, incredibly like thoughtful, kind. It will give someone the shirt off your back. But I think another interesting moment of this was you also recognizing that Colson Whitehead follows you uh, on what the platform formerly known as Twitter, I think,
Yeah,
and
yeah, yeah,
realizing. And I remember thinking like, that's such a cool, and it wasn't a flex. It was just like, oh, I didn't realize. Like, I think you were surprised and delighted by the realization, like, oh, Colson Whitehead follows me.
yeah.
Uh,
That so blows my mind. Yeah.
Pretty dope.
In my
I think
search of
your work
people,
is out there.
in my search, I wrote him. I always give these caveats and I say always. This is my first time reaching out to any people for blurbs, but I did reach out to him. I don't know if he ever read the DM, but he his work, so many different genres, and that kind of ties into what the show is about too. I'm just amazed about his by his ability to work in so many different genres, and specifically, I think it's his first novel, The Intuitionist,
Hmm.
opened up of like, oh, you can write something like that about characters like this, and um, that's a kind of his frequency is something that I'm chasing. I feel I haven't asked you the final question, but I think you've probably answered it in some form, which is how do you feel about that first craft now? You're engaged in that first pursuit now, writing poetry. How do you feel about it in general?
Yeah, I mean, poetry. I do feel complicated about poetry. It it it's still in a sort of mm, in my own kind of bourgeoisness feels like an irresponsible thing to be in pursuit of. It feels indulgent and a little self-absorbed in a way that like if given my druthers, I'd rather not have this sort of like exposure, like the vulnerability that writing poetry and reading poetry in front of people uh evokes is like it can be uncomfortable. Um but then you realize in the process that there is a part of me that really thrives in this, that desires this, that wants this. Um and so I have mixed feelings about poetry and to be fair, as long as I've been writing poetry, I also don't have a very clear sense of what I've heard other older poets call the po biz, right? Like the, which is a really funny play on words because, yeah, I mean, it's so much of it has to do with just like being a poor poet. But insofar as it is an industry, I think it's hard to pin down, hard to nail. You can't really say that there is one avenue for success or security, or as I think Ezra Pound would say in one of his legible poems, his maybe least fascistic poem. Uh, I think he says like something to the effect, "Poetry offers no sinecure," which means like you'll never sit pretty in your poetry really, and have like you'll have to do something else, right, to supplement your income, to live your life, to pay your bills. Um, because the fundamental material of poetry as language is literally invaluable. You cannot put a number value on language itself. You can maybe on a song lyric or some, but language itself is freely exchanged, right? Um, Priceless. And so when you're dealing with something that is in fact invaluable and priceless, then again, it's kind of impossible to evaluate it within a market economy. But but it's again one of those things that has never let go of me, despite my feeling like maybe I should let go of you. It it doesn't really harm me to write poetry, like an hour before opening the store or late at night while I'm grappling with my own anxieties or it's something that has overall enriched my life. And so my relationship to the craft probably feels uh, more exciting than it has ever felt, maybe. At the same time, I still feel like I don't know what I'm doing at all. So maybe this is a good thing. Maybe this is overall a good thing.
Nice. Yeah, it feels like it's just what you do. And I feel
Yeah.
like that's the thing that everyone needs to find is like regardless of accolades, if it's simply something that you do, there's nothing that anyone can there's no reason not to do it. You just do it.
Yeah.
It's just what you do.
Yeah.
Some people who have no interest in having, you know, a gallery, they just draw stuff. And this is what you know. And I think there's nothing wrong. I guess yeah. For me, I'm waking up to the idea that there's nothing wrong with a hobby, and
Mm.
sometimes if something like comedy just becomes my hobby, that's totally fine. That's probably better than chasing the big nope monster. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Although I also, as someone who's constantly thinking about faith and religion and things like that, I do feel to some extent that it is also a vocation because I think most people, especially in comedy, at this stage in the game, they kind of like they make that choice. They do the cost benefit analysis and they're like, I'm not going to keep doing this. I think there's a degree to which you love your craft, um, whether you think of it as comedy or you think of it as writing and like creative writing. I mean, I think it's a synergy of both of those things. And I also think comedians are the most intelligent of crafts people when it comes to language and ideas. I think you love it to a degree that you even when you're frustrated with it, you don't quit on your craft. And in that sense, I feel like it is part of your
Yeah.
calling, part of your vocation.
It's like being a parent. And you don't always love the kid. All right, let's wrap it. that's, that's the end of this episode. Thank
Amen. Amen.
Yeah, I'm glad that we got to have this conversation. This is a great way to kick off both of our projects, which launch in February.
Amen. I'm
Yeah.
excited. Thank you, brother. This has been an honor. I really previously felt like I was not an interesting enough person to be featured on You Are the Genre, but I'm really honored for the opportunity. I'm grateful to be chatting with you, especially at this juncture where we want people to listen to Judge Travis. We want people to laugh, to feel a connection to Judge Travis. Um, are you planning on doing anything for the release date?
Oh yeah, we're gonna do something at Taylor and Co. Books
Oh, oh, that's news to
on
me. I'm
February
excited.
11th for Judge Travis. So if you are a fan, uh, I'm sure you can follow Taylor and Co. on their website, on Instagram for all the information. There might be a
Yeah.
link to something in your show notes. Let's
And
hang
people can
out.
they can listen to it online as well
Yes. Yeah, of
on
course.
February 11th.
On February 11th. Yes, on February 11th, the first 3 episodes are coming out at once. So what will be very helpful is if people are already subscribed, and just ready to feast on 3 episodes, an hour and a half of comedy. You don't have to listen to it all at once, but if you're stuck in traffic, I think it's perfect for driving this show. Just do it now. Get your subscription out of the way.
I listen while at work, and would pause it occasionally if an elderly lady came in. Just so I didn't want her to hear some of the funnier moments and be like, hey. but I listened to it while I was at work, and I quite enjoyed it. It made me laugh. It made me feel like, I'm like, it's passing the time by in a really lovely way.
Nice.
So yeah.
And then maybe we'll play the 4th episode at this event. I don't know exactly.
There will be drinks. There will be Guinness. I know somebody really likes a good Guinness. Yeah. So there will be Guinness. There will be drinks to drink and good conversation to be had. You can pick up a copy of Petty God while you're at the bookstore if you want. Maybe I'll sign it if I'm sober enough to sign it for you. So yeah. But yeah, thank you again, brother, for this opportunity. And I'm excited for people to listen to Judge Travis. It is really not only funny, but it has so much heart. And so shout out to you. Shout out to the team. Shout out to all of the actors who really nailed their characters. I grew to really love each of them, even the obnoxious ones. And there are a few. There are quite a few.
There are a few.
But not of the main cast. They're like the side characters are really absurd.
And I hope that, once everyone picks up Petty God, that at least once they eat it from behind in Andrew's honor.
Yeah, you got to try it. You got to try it at least once.
Yeah. And that's the show. Big thanks to Andrew Colarusso for joining me in this episode. For more information about him, visit taylorcobooks.com or check out more of the links in the show notes. Freddie Nunez created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith produced it. And for the next 5 to 6 to maybe even 8 weeks, the following episodes of the show will feature some of the actors, some of the crew members, and some of the writers of Judge Travis. So this is Tim Barnes signing off with your weekly reminder that you are the genre.